They had turned my silence into the family joke. That night, silence became my weapon. The restaurant glowed with a warmth designed for photographs, amber lamps spilling over polished wood silverware catching the light as though part of the show. Chatter from other families rippled glasses, clinking bursts of laughter bouncing off the walls. At our table, the sound cut sharper, every laugh tuned toward Melissa. She thrived in it, leaning back as though the world bent to her comfort. So there I was, she announced, voice carrying far enough for the nearby tables. Cornered the guy myself, cuffs on in 30 seconds. You should have seen his face. Her grin was practice designed to draw admiration. My father's eyes gleamed like polished coins. "That's my girl, Harold," said, raising his glass. "A porter in uniform. Pride you can't buy." My mother nodded gently, smoothing the napkin in her lap, as though wrinkles threatened the fragile piece. Diane's way was compliance, a quiet that always seemed to erase me. I sat opposite Fork, still plate untouched. Their praise echoed the chorus I'd heard at Melissa's graduation when my own acceptance letter was brushed aside with my mother's flick of the hand. "Don't ruin her moment, Elaine," she had said. My success existed only as shadow. Melissa sliced through the memory. "So Elaine," she said, eyes glittering with cruelty disguised as humor, "file any important papers today?" The table chuckled, a ripple of amusement. Even the waiter smirked. I let silence bloom, letting them mistake it again. My hand brushed the inside of my jacket where the badge rested smooth and solid. They thought of me as a clerk, invisible, yet years of training had sharpened me. I had mapped rooms, measured angles of cameras, marked every exit. Tonight was no different. Every sign, every reflection filed into the ledger of my mind. Melissa leaned closer, feeding on laughter. "Don't look so serious, it's a joke. We all know you keep the alphabet in line for America." Another wave rose, sharp, grating. I didn't laugh. I studied her, the tilt of her chin, the glow from father's approval. She, the sergeant, the jewel. I, the shadow. Yet tonight the sting was gone, replaced by a steady current. I traced the badge again, as if it were a blade sheathed. "Ledger noted," I whispered to myself, words soundless. Their mockery entered my archive, never forgotten. Melissa raised her glass, basking. I mirrored her slowly, glass cool in my hand, catching amber light. I held it aloft, eyes steady on hers, silence stretching until laughter faltered just slightly. "Enjoy tonight, Melissa," I said at last, calm, almost gentle. "One day you'll wish you remembered my silence." She mistook my silence for surrender. I mistook her arrogance for evidence. The air inside the restaurant had shifted. Plates sat, cold edges smeared with sauce. Abandoned glasses leaned half-drained, and every voice at our table climbed sharper, desperate for dominance. The hum of the other diners slowed as they sensed spectacle forks hovered, conversations dimmed, as though we were the only stage left to watch. Harold had already made his toast earlier, a declaration etched in my mind. "Melissa is the child we can proudly introduce anywhere." He never realized the weight of what he'd revealed. His words carved borders. I was placed outside them, and Melissa stood inside, basking. Now she leaned across the table, eyes narrowing, catching the faint glint of metal where my jacket had shifted. A credential clip rested against my belt, half hidden, but her gaze locked on it instantly. "What's that?" She scoffed loud enough for two nearby tables to pause. "Picked it up at a gift shop, cute prop." I didn't flinch. "It's not fake," I said quietly. Her smirk widened, her voice sharp as glass. "Not fake." "Are you kidding, Elaine? Are you really going to sit here pretending, impersonating a federal officer? Do you know that's a crime?" The table froze. Harold's face darkened, a storm swelling behind his pride. Diane whispered, "Please. Not here. Not like this." But Melissa pressed harder, enjoying the eyes turning our way. "This is unbelievable," she declared, raising her voice as though addressing the entire restaurant. My sister, the so-called paper clerk, parading around with badges she probably bought online. How pathetic is that? A ripple of whispers spread through the room. I saw a man at the next table nudge his wife, saw two teenagers lift their phones, red dots blinking as they hit record. Melissa had given me exactly what I needed: witnesses. Slowly, deliberately, I unhooked the credential from my belt. The air seemed to still as I placed it on the white tablecloth. The black leather contrasted against polished wood and porcelain, stark, undeniable. Gasps rose from nearby seats. The manager appeared at Harold's shoulder, his voice a discreet murmur. Cameras are running. If you need copies, just ask. Melissa barely glanced at him. She was too intoxicated by her imagined triumph. Oh, this is rich, she sneered. She thinks slapping a badge on the table makes it real. Watch this. She yanked her phone free, fingers flying across the screen. Captain Whitaker, she announced, eyes gleaming as she dialed. He'll settle this right now. Your little fantasy is about to end. I leaned back in my chair, steady, every motion slow and measured. My voice was low, calm, cutting through the air like a blade. Be careful, Melissa. You may not like the answer you're asking for. Her lips curled into a performance smile, eyes bright with malice. She pressed the phone against her ear, pacing slightly by the table, eating up the attention of strangers now riveted by her show. Then she slammed the device down triumphantly. Captain Whitaker is on his way, she announced to the room, chest lifted as though in victory. When he gets here, this little fantasy ends. They thought I was cornered. But the tighter the trap closed, the clearer I saw the exits. The dining room had shifted into a hush that wasn't silence so much as pressure. Forks hovered in midair. Waiters stalled beside heat lamps, pretending to organize plates they'd already aligned twice. Phones lifted, tiny red eyes blinking. My pulse didn't climb. I marked the angles: front door, service corridor, the mirrored column that showed me the whole table in a sliver of glass, while Melissa drank in the attention like stage light. You've humiliated us. Harold hissed across the linen, the vein at his temple bright as a threat. Diane's fingers worried her napkin into a rope. Please, she whispered. Please, not like this. But Melissa had already committed to the performance. Anything less than spectacle would feel to her like defeat. The door chimed. Uniforms always change a room. Captain Samuel Whitaker crossed the threshold with a practiced economy, taking in the tableau without seeming to turn his head. Melissa's posture lifted, triumphant. She raised her voice, angling it to the right listeners. Captain, over here. When he reached us, she gestured at me as if presenting a shoplifter. Arrest her. She's impersonating you. He didn't look at me first. He looked at the table, at the credential resting there like a quiet argument. His face didn't change. Stone is a face too, and it tells you just as much. His hand came down unhurried and lifted the badge with two fingers, the way one might lift a photograph that could burn you. The room leaned with him. Melissa leaned as well, grinning toward Harold. Watch her crumble. She hissed, a whisper meant to be overheard. Harold's jaw clicked. I kept breathing. Whitaker turned his eyes to mine. Do you want to do this here? Here is fine. He set the credential back on the linen. This is not fake. This is federal issue. For a beat, the restaurant forgot how to swallow. A busser froze mid-step. A teenager lowered his phone half an inch. Heat climbed up Harold's neck to his cheeks, a tide he couldn't command back. Melissa's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, as if she'd lost the words she'd come to win with. I let the moment pass through me without taking ownership of it. The trap was still closing, and there was more use in its pressure yet. I watched Whitaker the way I watched weather, reading currents, not clouds. He remained neutral in the way professionals are neutral when they are not. Be very careful who you accuse. False claims carry weight. He hadn't raised his voice, but the sentence traveled, catching on glass and metal, gathering authority in the bounce. At the periphery, a woman at another table lowered her fork. Even the manager held still, his earlier offer about cameras hanging in the air like a favor he'd already extended. Diane's hand hovered over the back of my wrist, then withdrew, unsure of what gesture counted as love, under fluorescent scrutiny. I felt none of the ache I'd expected. Only a cool alignment like numbers falling into place after you stop trying to force them. Melissa swallowed, then manufactured a laugh, thin and brittle as spun sugar. "Everyone calm down," she announced, too loud, too bright. "If it's all so official, then what's the problem?" Her eyes snapped to Whitaker, then to me, then to the phones now, unabashedly aimed our way. She needed control back any kind. She needed to drag the room toward a verdict she understood. She planted her palms on the tablecloth as if staking ground. "Fine," she said, and the word rang with a dare. "Let's end this." Her gaze cut to Whitaker, then hooked on my face, seeking a flinch that wouldn't come. "Then prove it. If she's really one of you, let's hear it from headquarters. If this moment gripped you, stay with me, subscribe now so you won't miss the truth that unfolds in the next chapter." The masks they wore were painted in arrogance. All I had to do was tilt the mirror. The restaurant had shifted into something closer to a courtroom than a dining room. Forks lay abandoned, wine glasses stood untouched, and the air itself seemed heavy, as if waiting for a verdict. All around, phones hovered in hands, lenses pointed toward our table. My sister leaned back with her triumphant smirk, certain she had forced me into a corner I could never climb out of. She had demanded proof from headquarters. I gave a small nod toward Captain Whitaker. Without hesitation, he took his phone, pressed the button for speaker, and dialed. The sound of the line ringing filled the room, amplifying the tension. Melissa preened in her chair, brushing an invisible speck from her sleeve, already basking in the glow of imagined victory. Federal Command Desk came the crisp voice of an operator. "This is Captain Samuel Whitaker," he said evenly. "Confirm active credentials for Elaine Porter, badge number 734C17. The room held its breath. I didn't move. My fingers rested lightly on the tablecloth, my gaze steady on Melissa's face. The reply was immediate, clear, undeniable. "Elaine Porter, special assignment, active clearance. Status confirmed." It landed like a gavel. Melissa's smirk shattered. Color drained from her cheeks as her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came. Around us, whispers rippled, phones lifted higher, every angle catching the moment her certainty collapsed. "She forged it," she burst out suddenly, desperation cracking through her voice. "She's lying. She has to be lying." Calmly, I reached under my jacket and drew out a small file, thin, precise, wrapped in quiet menace. I slid it across the table, the folder whispering against polished wood. Photos and documents spilled into the light, dates, messages, records of Melissa's communications with men who shouldn't have had police intel. Whitaker's brow arched slightly. His hand rested near the file, but he didn't touch it yet. His gaze locked on Melissa. "You want to explain this?" She grabbed at the papers, crumpling one corner, eyes darting wildly. She framed me. She's making this up." But her voice cracked. The edges of control frayed like old rope. The diners were no longer whispering, they murmured openly, a rising tide of judgment. Their eyes shifted from her to me, as if weighing which story deserved belief. Harold's voice, low and rough, cut through the noise. "Melissa, what did you do?" The man who once toasted her as the only child worth presenting to the world now stared at her with disbelief etched into every line of his face. Diane pressed a trembling hand against her lips, unable to look at either of us. Melissa's breathing turned shallow, her words tumbling over each other. "Dad, she's twisting this. You know me. You know, I'd never." But the truth had already tilted. The mask she wore had cracked arrogance, peeling away into desperation. The file on the table spoke louder than her denials, louder than her protests. I leaned forward slightly, voice quiet enough that the diners had to hush to catch it. "You wanted proof, Melissa. Here it is. You're not just a liar. You're compromised." Her eyes blazed, but the fury lacked weight. She had nothing left to shield herself with. Whitaker finally took the file, flipping a page with deliberate calm. He looked back at her, and then at the operator still on the line. His voice was firm, final. "We'll need a formal inquiry. Effective immediately, she's suspended." The words struck harder than any slap. Melissa gasped, then shouted, her voice shrill against the silence of the room. "You can't do this to me." And that was where it ended, the moment the masks finally broke, leaving her bare before everyone watching. They thought silence would erase me. Instead, silence carved my name where their applause used to be. The air outside the courthouse was brisk, sharp enough to sting the lungs, yet it carried a clarity that no room of chandeliers and polished wood could ever offer. Reporters pressed forward, microphones, extended cameras raised. Their shouts overlapped, demanding statements, demanding scandal. Behind them, by the marble steps, Melissa staggered, wrists held lightly but firmly by two officials. Her eyes were wild, her voice raw with denial. She screamed at the flashing lenses, every denial louder than the last, but the crowd did not cheer. Their silence condemned her more effectively than any judge's gavel. Captain Whitaker stepped forward, posture rigid, in uniform, voice steady as stone. Agent Elaine Porter acted with honor. The record speaks for itself. He left it there, no grand speech, no indulgence in drama, just truth sealed in brevity. The press pivoted as if on cue, lenses narrowing toward me. A reporter raised her voice above the rest. "Do you have anything to say, Agent Porter?" I reached into my jacket with deliberate calm, unfastening the credential case. The weight of it was familiar, reassuring. I held it up high enough for every camera to catch the federal seal under the harsh winter sun. "This speaks for me." And then silence. Reporters lowered microphones, the crowd stilled, even the clicking shutters slowed. In that moment, silence was not emptiness. It was verdict. My dignity restored not by applause, but by the absence of mockery, by a hush that carried farther than any cheer. Harold stood on the edge of the steps, shoulders bowed as if the weight of his pride had finally crushed him. For the first time, he did not raise his voice, did not command. His silence was not mine, it was shame. Diane lingered near him, torn, trembling, until at last she moved closer to me. A light touch on my arm, tentative but real. Her eyes said what her lips could not: I was no longer alone in this fight. The cameras captured Melissa's collapse, her face distorted by disbelief. Yet it was not her ruin I held onto as I turned away. It was the stillness, the confirmation that betrayal had been transmuted into justice. A week later, I found myself walking through Arlington. The cemetery stretched in quiet rows, each stone a story cut short, yet carved eternal. The November wind carried the faint rustle of flags and the solemn dignity of those who had given everything. I placed my hand on the cold marble of a headstone, a name that had marched beside me once. My breath clouded in the air, merging with silence. "This was never just about me," I whispered. "Legacy isn't given. It's built." The phone in my pocket buzzed sharp against the hush. A message flashed, new lead uncovered. Melissa wasn't working alone. I looked at the horizon, the graves bathed in fading sunlight. My silence broke only for a single sentence. "Then this isn't over." I carried silence like a burden for years, yet it became the very blade that set me free. If my story stirred something in you, let me hear it. Share your thoughts, your support, your reflections for me. Every comment you leave is not just for the character you read, but for the quiet voices in real life who long to be heard. And remember, this never confuse silence with weakness. Sometimes holding back is the sharpest form of strength, and patience carves a legacy far deeper than applause. Stand firm even when the world laughs, justice will come.